Hello, a really warm welcome to you. My name is John Cheek. I'm here from UniTasterDays, and it's my job to introduce this on-demand event today and also introduce our speaker. The subject we're looking at today is zoology, and I'm delighted to be joined by Kingsley Hunt from the University of Exeter. Now, Kingsley is a brilliant person to tell you about studying zoology because he's not just completed an undergraduate course in zoology and also a master's course in zoology. Kingsley is also about to start, or maybe has even started, a PhD in zoology as well. So no doubt we'll tell you a little bit more about that during this session. But this is one of our on-demand events where we tell you more about studying different subjects at university and things like why you might be interested in studying that subject, what to expect on the course if you did study it, and potential careers and much more as well. But I'm always super conscious you've tuned in to hear from my experts, not from myself. So with that, I'll pass things over to Kingsley Hunt, joining us from the University of Exeter.
Hi there, folks. My name's Kingsley, and I'm a current student at the University of Exeter's Penryn campus, where I study a zoology degree. So in this presentation, I'm going to briefly explain what I study in a zoology degree, how I study it, so give you an insight into what the day or week of a life of a zoology student is like, and then also talk a little bit about postgraduate or career opportunities that you might go on to after completing a zoology degree. So to start with, what do you actually study in a zoology degree, or what is zoology? Well, zoology in its broadest sense is simply the study of animal biology, or biology applied to animals. So thinking about how they evolve, interact, behave, and survive in their environment and with people too. So zoology is closely linked to other topics in biology, such as ecology, genetics, physiology, and can also include lots of marine biology as well. So zoology can include both terrestrial and marine ecosystems and animals that you'll study. So in a zoology degree, you can expect to study the whole breadth of biology, but usually you're applying it in the examples you're studying are more often animals than other taxa like plants or fungi, for example. So you can expect to study things like genetics, things like physiology, also behavior, evolutionary biology, all of those sorts of topics, but particularly through the lens of thinking about animals. The types of modules, so they're the subtopics that you study in a zoology degree, can vary quite a lot. Sometimes they can be taxa specific, so relating to a particular group of species or animals. So for example, in the second year of my degree at the University of Exeter, I had the option of modules such as the biology of birds or the biology of mammals. That's if you're particularly interested in an animal group. That's one way that the teaching in your degree might be structured to focus particularly on all aspects of their biology. Or it could be structured slightly differently and focus on a topic. So it might be, for example, ecophysiology or behavioral ecology or quantitative genetics. So studying perhaps by the type of topic rather than the type of animals or species. Zoology degrees can be really wide-ranging, and you might find in different universities and institutions the structure of the program is slightly differently. Often, as is the case in most universities, you'll have a slightly more prescriptive first year where you have more core modules, and then you'll typically have more choice going into the second and third year of your degree. And depending on different courses, you might have more sort of microbiology, plant biology, cellular biology in that first year. So it might be, some start with kind of a broader biology degree, but then specializes into more strictly zoology, whereas other courses start completely with that animal focus from the beginning. So if you are looking at different zoology programs, it's worth having a look at the modules and seeing the differences between them. Zoology can also be quite an interdisciplinary degree, meaning that it interacts or has crossover with different subjects too. So if you're studying ecology and conservation issues, often that can lead to modules that perhaps are closely linked with departments such as geography or environmental science. If you're studying conservation from more of a policy or decision-making angle, that can sometimes interact with topics like politics and sociology and thinking about the human dimensions of our interactions with wildlife. And also, as an example of what I studied in my second year of my degree, I did a maths module as part of my zoology degree that was looking at the maths of climate change and the maths of the environment. So in that module, I had a really fun project, a big piece of coursework where I was trying to understand the dynamics of climate change, to make a very simple climatic model to predict how the temperature might change and habitats might change in a particular region. And I was looking at a mountain range in Central America, and I was trying to predict how this particular frog species would perhaps move, migrate up a mountain and shift its range in response to changing climate. So trying to work out if it still had enough space to live, even if it had to move to kind of track the cooling temperatures up the mountain as the world otherwise warms. So really interesting chance to study a topic that has real relevance and crossover with quite a lot of other subjects as well. So as a zoology student, it means you've always got variety in the types of things you're learning, sometimes quite theoretical biology topics in kind of genetics and evolution, and sometimes much more kind of applied ecology, conservation, real sorts of practical problem solving and boots on the ground type work there. So a really diverse course and worth having a look at different programs and how they're structured if you're interested in zoology. So next, what's the teaching like? What's it like to actually be a zoology student? So you're likely will be taught in a diverse range of different methods. I'll speak mostly about my experience at the University of Exeter, but I imagine it's similar at other universities too. So firstly, you're likely to have lectures, which are larger taught classes, typically in a big room or auditorium, where you're often first exposed to a particular content or topic, and you're expected to kind of keep notes. Lectures can be quite interactive. Definitely, that was my experience at the University of Exeter's Penryn campus, but typically they're a little bit more one-directional in that it's just the academic passing quite a lot of knowledge over to you. But then they're supported by seminars, which are smaller, more classroom-based teaching sessions, and they can be much more interactive and much more discussion usually takes place in a seminar. So often I'd have debates in my seminar sessions, or I'd have to do a critique of a particular paper that we might have asked to have read beforehand. So often there's more of a requirement to do some homework or preparation for a seminar than perhaps for a lecture. Also lots of presentations, sometimes assessed as well in seminars, sometimes on my own, or sometimes as part of a group, kind of leading a discussion on a particular topic each week. So seminars, I thought, I always really valued in my degree as being a chance for where more of that discussion, more of that question and answering process and that critical thinking can really take place. So a great place to really do a lot of the kind of deeper dive on the topic, if you like. Zoology as a science subject also includes lots of practicals as well, and that can be split between the lab, so in the laboratory, or in the field, so actually going out and about, often studying animals or studying ecosystems in the wild as well. So lab practicals can involve all sorts of different things. I've done lots of examples of dissections from things like squirrels to different fish species. In one of the years of my degree, I also witnessed a seal and dolphin dissection, which is not something that you definitely see every day. Some really amazing practical opportunities. I've also done some live animal experiments in the lab, typically with invertebrates, looking at their behavioral changes, response to certain stimuli, and also lots of kind of genetics practicals as well, and learning certain methodologies. And as I say, that's kind of the lab side of things, but then also lots of opportunities within a zoology or similar degrees to get out into the field, where you might go and do observations of wild animals, perhaps setting up transects and looking at the variation over an environmental gradient. Often in our degree, we're encouraged to take field notebooks with us and make sketches and observe what we were seeing and keep species lists and that kind of thing. So there can be a real emphasis on natural history skills and just simply being able to, observe, identify, and take notes on the nature that you're seeing within zoology degrees, which I think is a really valued skill set. And so much of biology and science comes from, inquisitive and careful observation to begin with. Those field trips can just involve day trips. So studying in Cornwall, we'd often go out to different parts of the coast near Falmouth, which is where the university is based, or perhaps to places like the Lizard or the North Coast, and perhaps just go for a day exploring different ecosystems and different habitats, All those field trips can often be further afield and perhaps involve residential overnight stays. So at the University of Exeter, at least, in your second year of a zoology degree, you'll have a 1 week residential, and in the final year of your zoology degree, you'll have a 2 week residential. So in my degree, I went to Iceland as my first first field trip, and that was looking at climate change biology. So in Iceland, it's a really geothermally active area, lots of volcanoes, for example, and that means you've got, in the one valley where we were based and studying for the week, we had a natural thermal gradient. We had lots of different streams, about 9 different streams, and they range from about 3 degrees to about 25 degrees in temperature. You've kind of got a natural experiment there looking at the effects of temperature. So it's a good kind of proxy for understanding what a future of climate change might be like in global warming. So for that week, we were measuring the different species, mainly invertebrate, freshwater invertebrates, in these streams, and trying to see how the composition, the different communities differed between the different streams, and also measuring some things like their metabolic rate and their rates of respiration in the lab as well. That was a really cool experience, and actually the work we did on that field trip directly led into a publication and some real work. So we were working not only with academics, but we had lots of PhD students with us as well, showing us how they go about their research, and the kind of data we were collecting was directly feeding into their project, which was a really invaluable teaching experience. And then in my final year, so the 2 week field course that I went on, I went to India. So slightly different this time, was focusing more on issues of conservation and human wildlife conflict, looking at ecotourism and whether it's a successful model or solution perhaps for conservation or not. India is a fascinating case study. It's one of the world's biodiversity hotspots, home to incredibly charismatic species like tigers and elephants, often quite large requirements in terms of their land and the resources they need to be conserved. Also, India is a massively kind of developing country with lots of other problems to solve as well. So trying to look at how you kind of manage both of those issues at the same time. And that was a really profound teaching experience, going in the field, not only seeing all of that wildlife, but having lots of lectures, lots of really quite in-depth discussions. One day, for example, we went on safari and we managed to actually see 3 tigers, which was incredible, including 2 cubs. And afterwards, we had a really kind of open discussion about the successes of tiger conservation in India and then globally as well, and thinking about whether that kind of the model of conservation that we'd participated in, so ecotourism, whether it was successful or not. And that's one thing to learn about that in a lecture theatre. It's a totally other experience to actually see it in the field and kind of walk the walk yourself. So often the highlight, I think, of lots of zoology students is the opportunities they get to actually study animals in the wild, whether that be in the UK or abroad as well. And in terms of the assessment in a zoology degree, it can be really varied. And again, perhaps something to look at that could change quite a lot between different institutions and how they structure their degree. Again, at the University of Exeter, at least, it was split fairly evenly between exams and coursework. Typically, exams would be at the end of the year or the end of the module, and would involve an essay on a set topic that you'd have to prepare for, and then write an extended essay. And you're really encouraged to use a lot of your own research and your own kind of independent perspective on the topic. So a lot of degrees at university studying zoology, you'll be given some examples, or some of the teaching will take place in the structured lectures and seminars, but then you're expected to go away and supplement that with your wider reading and research as well. So that's really encouraged, and a route to success, if you like, is to do a lot of that own research and really bring that in to the work that you submit. As well as kind of exams, there's also a variety of coursework or assignments as well, and they can be really varied. So often you might do a lab practical in class, collect lots of data as a combined kind of class level data set, and then your assignment would be to go away and to write that up as a full kind of lab report, like a journal article, like a scientific paper, and submit that. So you'd be responsible for the data analysis, visualization, and then actually writing up the whole report too. The data analysis is a really important part of any science degree, I think, but particularly in zoology, biology. The data we analyze, because it comes from wild animals, can sometimes be quite messy or noisy. So there's lots of statistical techniques you can learn to deal with that and to try and answer the question that you're interested in. So most zoology degrees will include an element of kind of data analysis or statistics as perhaps one of the modules that they'll teach you, and more often that will involve also learning to code and program as well. So for example, at the University of Exeter we use software called R, which is really commonly used across sort of both academia and industry, and is a really valuable skill set again, which I'll talk more about on the next slide too. But the coursework can also be more varied too. So I mentioned doing group presentations and seminars or debates, and sometimes I was assessed for the contributions to those. So if you're a better speaker perhaps than you are a writer, then that's a good opportunity to have a different kind of assessment that might suit you best. But also coursework can be quite creative too. So I once had to make a video and use some animation skills, which is something that was totally new to me, talking about local marine conservation threats for a first year module. So really diverse and worth checking and having a look at different institutions and how they structure the exams and coursework. And another thing that's not listed on the slide, but is an often a common feature of zoology degrees at different universities, and definitely something that was true of mine, is that you'll do a dissertation, so a final year research project, which will typically take place over perhaps as much as half or perhaps even longer of your final year, where you'll have ownership and responsibility for your own research. That's kind of the big final project, if you like, of your degree. So in my year, I was studying termites in the lab. So every day I'd be in checking up on the termites, responsible for some of the lab husbandry, so making sure the colonies were all okay, and also setting up these experiments. So I was studying, I'm really interested in the topic of fighting and intergroup fighting, so how animal groups sometimes compete or cooperate with one another. So I was setting up these staged interactions, these staged fights, if you like, between different termite colonies, and then filming them, and then analysing their behavioural responses to see if they change how they behave in their colonies, both before and after experience a bit of competition or fight or conflict with a rival colony. That was really cool and a great experience for me. And actually, that's where my love for research, if you like, first started, which has directly informed what I've gone on to do after the degree. So hopefully giving you a little bit of a snapshot of what it's like to be a zoology student there, and the kind of diversity you can expect in your timetable in terms of how you might be taught. Typically, as with most degrees, you'll start with more contact hours, so more timetabled, structured teaching in your first and second year. And as you go through, that will drop away a little bit as you're expected to pick up more of this independent research and independent learning yourself, including in your final year, likely a large amount of time dedicated towards your dissertation that I've just spoken about. And so finally, just to wrap up, what kind of careers and opportunities might there be after graduating with a zoology degree? But I think the first thing to stress is that zoology is a science subject, it's part of STEM, and so it means your opportunities are really, really broad. Whether you directly work in kind of the biological sciences in the field in some respect, or if you actually decide to take what you've learned on the degree program and apply it in a slightly different context. So in studying zoology, you'll get a really quite diverse and valuable and transferable skill set. So I spoke about data analysis and visualization, often using programming and coding software, which is really valuable in the kind of world of big data that we're seemingly going into. So the ability to manipulate and analyze data is really valuable, whether you stay in science or go into all sorts of other industries too. Being a science degree, you'll also learn a lot about the scientific method, setting up fair tests and experiments, and thinking critically about the evidence that people provide and whether they support or refute different theories and hypotheses. So that idea of critical thinking and being able to weigh up, evidence in support of complex different ideas or not, again, is a really valuable skill set that lots of different employers, whether you stay in science or stay in academia or go into other industries, will definitely value and appreciate coming from a zoology degree. Also, premium on science communication. So particularly a lot of the reason why we have so many presentations and talks and discussions, at least in the University of Exeter degree, is to get you thinking about how you can communicate some of the complex science you might have picked up in quite heavy and quite dense scientific journal articles, actually trying to strip out the core message and be able to converse or put it in a 5-minute presentation or something like that is a really valuable skill set again. So that's something that you can take, being able to look at quite complex and dense information and take out the key messages is something that you'll definitely be taught and a skill that you'll refine over the course of the degree. I think doing zoology also has some unique attributes as well. Often it can involve quite long hours in the field, particularly if you're studying species like birds. You typically have to get up quite early in the morning. Sometimes the weather can be quite bad. You might be in quite remote locations if you're doing field work, perhaps without reliable electricity or internet. And often there's team working involved in these kind of scenarios. So I think that kind of problem solving under pressure, sometimes in quite difficult conditions, really gives you a certain resilience that you can apply to your future career, and something that the employers will definitely pick up on as someone coming out of a zoology degree. In terms of the type of careers, perhaps some of my friends coming from the same graduating cohort as me have gone on to do, really varied. Lots stay in science, and there's lots of different avenues here. So some really enjoyed the lab kind of components of the course that I mentioned. They might work kind of in professional laboratories now, working perhaps on things like genetics. I have some friends who work in environmental DNA, for example, and running sequences software for people. Also, some friends have changed industry slightly, so taking what they've learned in a zoological context and then applied it perhaps to work for in industries like pharmaceuticals as well, but still using that same lab skills that they've developed, transferable often across different areas of biology or different parts of science. Lots of my friends are more interested in the ecology and conservation, and actually, putting their boots on or their wellies, as it may be, and making a difference. And so they often work for NGOs or wildlife charities, both at home and abroad. A really popular route of employment is to be an ecological consultant, and they work in a variety of different contexts. But anytime anyone's building a new set of houses or a new road or rail development, they'll have to do an ecological assessment to see, if they're disrupting any habitat, if there's the presence of any endangered species that might be protected under law, or that kind of thing. And so that's a really popular and quite common route of employment for zoology or similar graduates. There's also lots of opportunities outside of zoology. So I mentioned those transferable skills in data analysis. They can be really valuable if you go and work in industries like finance or other jobs in the city, perhaps. So you can take what you've learned and apply it in a totally different field. Lots of friends also work in industries like teaching as well. They're worth having a look online, and if you're interested in a particular course at a particular university, check out. They'll almost certainly have a sort of graduate prospects page online, or that you can talk to them about at an open day perhaps to get that information. But really broad prospects, I think, doing zoology, and as I say, particularly because it's a STEM degree, so you have all of that kind of data analysis, scientific background that you'd expect with that. And another really popular career after graduating is to actually stay at university and do more zoology and do more research. So that's actually what I've decided to do. So my undergraduate degree was in zoology. I've just recently finished a master's by research program, also in kind of evolutionary biology type topics. And then I'm starting a degree this autumn, a PhD that is. So yeah, you can stay in academia and stay in research as well. And that doesn't just have to be at universities. Often there's private research groups, or perhaps places like ZSL, the Zoological Society of London, will also employ zoology graduates to continue to do research on all sorts of different topics of animal biology, from evolution, conservation to animal behavior. So loads and loads of opportunities out there. And I think it's a really fun and interesting degree to do. And I think particularly just as we finish this presentation, particularly given the backdrop of today, a climate and ecological crisis that's taking place. I think studying zoology, studying topics about extinctions and about conservation and about evolution feels particularly relevant, and it's a degree where you really feel like what you're learning about has a sense of importance and urgency to it sometimes, and I think it's a space where you can really feel like you're making a difference some days. So that's something that I've really enjoyed out of my zoology degree, the feeling that it's valuable work, it's interesting work, and also all those amazing travel opportunities that I've spoken about to go and study amazing animals in their natural habitats too. So hopefully you've enjoyed this presentation. Thank you very much for listening to me, and do have a look online if you're more interested in zoology, and check out different universities and their different courses.